Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Hey, Chris. And wow, do we have a meaty one today? We're diving into the White House's new National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence, which dropped on March 20th and has been generating a firestorm of reactions ever since.
Yeah, this is arguably the most significant AI policy document to come out of Washington in years. So let's break it down. At a high level, what is this framework actually trying to do?
So, this is essentially the White House's legislative blueprint, their wish list for how Congress should regulate AI going forward. It came out of an executive order President Trump signed back in December 2025, and it covers 7 big priority areas: child safety, community effects from AI, copyright, government censorship concerns, federal regulation, jobs, and, the really spicy one, state preemption.
Okay, let's start with that spicy one, because I think that's where most of the debate is happening. What exactly is the preemption piece?
So here's the deal. Right now, you've got this patchwork of state-level AI laws popping up everywhere. Colorado passed one, California's been working on several, other states are jumping in. The framework basically says Congress should step in and preempt state AI laws that impose, quote, undue burdens on AI development and deployment.
And when they say preempt, they mean override? Like federal law would trump state law?
Exactly. The framework wants to prohibit states from regulating AI development, from, quote, unduly burdening the use of AI for otherwise lawful activities, and, this is the big one, from imposing liability on AI developers for third-party misuse of their models.
Wait, that last point is huge. So if someone takes an open source AI model and uses it to create deepfakes or commit fraud, the developer of the model wouldn't be liable under state law.
That's the proposal. And you can see why it's controversial. The argument from the White House side is that you need a unified national approach. If you're an AI company, you can't operate under 50 different regulatory regimes. It would be like the early internet. Imagine if every state had different rules about what you could put on a website.
That's actually a pretty compelling analogy. NetChoice, the tech trade group, made exactly that comparison. They said the light touch approach is what enabled the internet revolution in the 90s.
Right, and the Business Software Alliance was supportive too. They liked the focus on developing an AI-ready workforce and liberating select government data for AI training. So the industry is broadly on board.
And I want to emphasize something. We're talking about an industry that's moving at an absolutely breakneck pace. Just this month, we saw GPT 5.4 launch, Gemini 3.1 Ultra drop. Mistral released a small model that outperforms closed models 3 to 5 times its size. The policy challenge is that the technology doesn't wait for legislators.
Exactly. And that speed is actually one of the framework's strongest arguments for a light touch approach. If you build a heavy regulatory apparatus, by the time the rules are written, the technology has already leapfrogged whatever you were trying to regulate.
But there's a big but coming, isn't there?
Oh, a massive but. Democrats are not happy. Rep. Don Beyer, along with several other Democratic representatives, actually introduced something called the Guardrails Act on the same day the framework dropped. Its purpose? To repeal the executive order entirely.
That's quite the statement. What are the specific concerns?
Senator Maria Cantwell, the ranking member on the Commerce Committee, has been pushing for a much more structured approach. One grounded in standards, testing, and public infrastructure investment. She basically wants the government to have more hands on the wheel, not less.
And then there's the accountability angle, right?
Exactly. Americans for Responsible Innovation put out a pretty blistering statement. They argued the framework basically shields AI developers from liability while telling the public it's about innovation. Their line was something like, the public wants safeguards now, and this framework recommends banning state laws while urging Congress not to create new liability for the AI industry.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. Isn't there a real risk that a patchwork of state laws actually does slow down innovation? I mean, we've seen it with data privacy. The lack of a federal privacy law has created a compliance nightmare for businesses.
That's a totally fair point, and I think reasonable people can disagree here. The question is really about where you draw the line between enabling innovation and ensuring accountability. The framework does try to thread that needle. It has carve-outs that would preserve states' traditional police powers in certain areas.
What kind of carve-outs?
States would still be able to enforce laws protecting children, preventing fraud, and protecting consumers. So it's not a total wipeout of state authority. It's more like States, you can still go after bad actors, but you can't create a whole new regulatory regime specifically targeting AI technology.
That's actually a more nuanced position than the headlines suggest. Let's talk about the child safety piece, because that seems to be one area with bipartisan potential.
Yeah, child safety is front and center. The framework builds on the Take It Down Act, which was already signed into law. It requires AI services and platforms to take specific measures to protect children and empower parents to control their children's digital environment.
And this is the one area where even the critics seem to agree that federal action makes sense.
Pretty much. Nobody wants to be the person arguing against protecting kids from AI-generated deepfakes or predatory AI interactions. So that's likely to be the first piece that actually moves through Congress.
Let's talk about another interesting element, the copyright question. How does the framework handle AI training on copyrighted content?
This is actually one of the more fascinating moves. The framework essentially punts. It leaves the question of whether training AI models on copyrighted content violates existing copyright law or constitutes fair use to the courts. There are multiple lawsuits working their way through the system right now, and the White House basically said, let the judges figure this out.
Is that a cop-out or is that actually the right call?
I think it's pragmatic, honestly. This is genuinely one of the hardest questions in AI policy right now. You've got creators who feel their work is being used without compensation, and you've got AI companies arguing that training on publicly available data is transformative fair use. The courts are the right venue for working through the legal nuances. If Congress tried to legislate a bright line here, they'd probably get it wrong.
Now here's something I found really interesting. The framework explicitly rejects creating a new federal AI regulatory body. Why is that significant?
It's significant because a lot of AI governance proposals, both from the EU and from various US think tanks and lawmakers, have called for something like an FDA for AI, a centralized body that would review and approve AI systems before they go to market. The framework says no. Keep oversight with existing sector-specific agencies.
So the FDA would still regulate AI in healthcare, the SEC would handle AI in finance, that kind of thing?
Exactly. And the framework also leans heavily on industry-led standards rather than government mandates. So think NIST frameworks, industry consortiums, developing best practices, that sort of approach.
That's very much in line with how the US has historically regulated technology, right? Light touch, let the industry self-regulate, step in when things go wrong.
Right. And depending on your perspective, that's either the genius of American innovation policy or the reason we keep having tech-driven crises without adequate guardrails. History gives you evidence for both views.
One thing I haven't heard discussed as much is the infrastructure angle. The framework talks about data centers.
Oh, yes. And this is actually really important for the practical side of AI development. The framework recommends streamlined approval processes for building data centers, which are the physical backbone of AI. And there's a consumer protection element, too. It proposes protecting residential ratepayers from electricity cost increases driven by massive AI compute demand.
That's a real concern. I've seen reports about entire regions dealing with power grid strain because of data center expansion. Northern Virginia, parts of Texas, the Pacific Northwest. These communities are feeling it.
Absolutely. We're talking about facilities that can consume as much electricity as a small city. Some of the largest data centers being planned right now would need a gigawatt or more of power. And there's a real tension between the economic benefits these facilities bring, jobs, tax revenue, and the impact on local infrastructure.
So the framework is trying to say, build the data centers we need for AI leadership, but don't stick residential customers with the bill.
Basically, yes. And the streamlined approval process is significant too. Right now, getting permits for a major data center can take years. If you want the US to remain the global leader in AI, you need the infrastructure to support it, and that means cutting through some of the red tape.
Let's zoom out for a moment. The R Street Institute, which is a center-right think tank, called this a sensible basis for AI governance going forward. But can this actually become law? What's the legislative path?
That's the million-dollar question. You need bipartisan support to get anything through Congress, and right now the two sides are pretty far apart. Democrats want more accountability, more structure, more government involvement. The White House framework is clearly pro-industry, pro-innovation, light on enforcement mechanisms.
So we could end up in a stalemate, where nothing happens at the federal level, and states just keep passing their own laws anyway?
That's the most likely near-term outcome, honestly, which is ironic because the whole point of the framework was to prevent that patchwork problem. If Congress can't come together on a federal approach, the states will fill the vacuum. Colorado, California, Illinois, they're not going to wait around.
It reminds me of the data privacy situation. We still don't have a comprehensive federal privacy law. And we've got the CCPA. We've got state laws everywhere.
Great parallel. And the AI stakes are arguably even higher because the technology is moving so much faster. By the time Congress figures out what to do, the landscape could look completely different.
So where does this leave companies that are actually building and deploying AI right now? What should they be doing?
My take, and this is what most of the law firms analyzing this are saying too, is plan for compliance with the most restrictive regulations you might face. If you're operating nationally, assume some states will have strict requirements and build to that standard. Don't wait for federal preemption that might never come.
That's pragmatic advice. Build for the toughest standard and you're covered everywhere.
Exactly. And honestly, that's probably better for your users and your reputation anyway. Nobody's going to complain that your AI system is too safe or too transparent.
You know what strikes me about this whole debate? It's really a microcosm of a much bigger question. How do democracies govern technologies that move faster than their institutions?
That's such a great point, Chris. And it's not unique to AI. We saw the same dynamic with social media, with cryptocurrency, with genetic engineering. But AI is different in scale because it touches everything. It's not a niche technology. It's a general purpose technology that's being embedded into healthcare, education, transportation, finance, criminal justice. The governance challenge is enormous.
Which is maybe why the framework takes the sector-specific approach rather than trying to create one unified AI regulator.
Yeah, and there's real wisdom in that even if it's imperfect. A doctor using AI to help diagnose cancer faces very different risks and considerations than a bank using AI to approve loans. Having the FDA handle one and the CFPB handle the other actually makes sense because they understand the domain-specific risks.
Final thoughts on this, Laura? What's your big takeaway from this framework?
I think the most significant thing is that it exists at all. We've moved from, should the government regulate AI, to here's a detailed blueprint for how. Whether you love it or hate it, the fact that the White House is putting forward specific legislative recommendations with this level of detail means AI governance is no longer a theoretical debate. It's a concrete policy process now, and that's huge.
Well said. And I think regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, engaging with these proposals is critical. This is going to shape the AI ecosystem for decades.
100%. Read the framework, form your own opinions, and let your representatives know what you think. This is one of those moments where public input actually matters.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.